Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It is I, the Desert Viking, and today I have some interesting items to discuss. Now, as I have mentioned in past videos, I don't really post videos on the regular. It is not my intent to spam my channel with just empty content or repeating myself over and over again to get people to click on it. That's not what I want to do. So that means my content is spread out. But it is my hope that when I do post something, that you might find it useful. So today, what we're going to discuss is gematria and geometry as it pertains to esoteric studies, and particularly as it pertains to the Zelator degree work of the Golden Dawn. It does touch a little bit upon esoteric Freemasonry as well. So we're going to go ahead and get into this. This is a little presentation that I have put together. And again, if you have any comments, please leave them in the comment section below. If you like this content, give it a like, and I'm free to answer any questions you may have. All right, esoteric studies, gematria and geometry. So first we talk about what gematria is. Gematria itself is a part of what is known as literal Kabbalah. Literal Kabbalah encompasses several practices, but gematria is one of those. It's probably the most well-known of the group. The word gematria stems from the late Hebrew and from the Greek gematria or geometry. So you can see that the name itself is heavily tied into geometry. And for Freemasons, geometry is a very important science. And I will postulate to go so far as to say for any mystery school student, any esoteric student, at least in the Western studies, that geometry should be one of the pinnacle studies that you pay attention to, that you pay close attention to. Because as they say, numbers are the language of God. And as numbers are the language of God, geometry is math and numbers made manifest. Geometry is mathematic in the physical form. When you break the number geometry down into its own geometric value, we get the number 273. So understanding what gematria is that each character in Hebrew, Greek, Coptic, Latin, even English, they've assigned a numeric value to, and therefore a word or a phrase will have a numeric value, which you can then tie to esoteric meanings. I will point out something very, very important. There is no one geometric system to rule them all. Just because a word is the number 88 in Greek geometry does not mean it's going to be 88 in the Hebrew. And even Hebrew has several forms, which we will see in this very video. There's two that I'm going to show, and there's many more than that. So there's different ways you can come up with these numbers. Think of gematria as a kind of cipher that you can use to encode information in documents. There's not just one. And in the ancient times, there were several. And today, there are many. There are many different ciphers. Okay, so from one cipher, gematria came out to be 273. And when you cross-reference that number 273, well, you get some interesting things. First of all, you get the number 12 or the number 3 when you add them all up, which is the Trinity. So geometry comes out to be the number 3, or the Trinity. But additionally, it has a very close association with Freemasonry, and some esoteric Freemasons will say that the origins of the fraternity had nothing to do with stone building, but had everything to do with the mystery schools and geometry. Now, geometry was a part of the mystery schools back in classical times. Plato was very famous for his pillars, which essentially said that geometry is the language of the gods, and any who would call themselves initiates were masters of geometry. And thus, the Kabbalah, which is tied to geometry, is tied heavily into Freemasonry. Some Masons will, actually many Masons will disagree with that. I'm just throwing it out there. The number 273, there are many things that it ties to in Freemasonry, but three things in particular. It is the geometric name of Hiram Abiff. It is the geometrical phrase for the stone that the builders rejected. And it is the geometrical correspondence to the identity of who Hiram Abiff really was and what the origin of the word was. I'm not getting into any of that stuff in this video or in public ever, but that is something to chew on for a little moment for you if you are into Freemasonry. Now, as I stated before, I've already stated before what Gematria was, so we give an example of how it might be used. And again, knowing, and I'm breaking down two formats of two Gematria systems from Hebrew specifically. The values of a word or phrase will be the sum of their geometric value. So in this case, I am using Hasatan, the Hebrew word Hasatan, which we would in English say is the Satan. Hasatan is 4 Hebrew characters. And you read Hebrew from right to left. So the word Hasatan is He, Shin, or Sin, Tet, and the final Nun, which is N, HSTN. Now, when we break them down in the standard geometrical configuration, the letter He, the first letter, is the number 5. Sin is 300, Tet is 9, and Nun is 5 or 50, which means the standard value is 364. The way the Golden Dawn teaches is another version where there are 5 characters in the Hebrew alphabet that have a final form, meaning Nun in this case is that long letter, is the final form of the letter Nun. It has another version of itself as well, which is what you'd normally see it as, but because it's at the end of that word, it's the final form. And the final form of Nun is 700 as opposed to 50. In which case, if you're using that version of Gematria, which we learn in the Golden Dawn, then its value comes out to be 1014. So again, think of these like ciphers. It depends on how the text itself was written and which cipher it was used to correlate to these numbers. 364 is where they come up with the idea that the devil can prosecute on the earth for 364 days, with one day being an exception. This is where some of this stuff comes from, these numbers. 1014 has other meanings, which you can look up on your own. And again, it's using a different ciphered system. So always keep that in mind, that it just depends on which version is being used for that particular text. And the writers of the holy texts, as well as alchemical texts and the Greeks in the early part of the Common Era, made heavy use of Gematria. Whether we like to acknowledge it or not, a lot of what is in the Bible and in the Gnostic texts are coded. They are coded to mean things. They give you an exoteric meaning that everyone can understand, and then there's a hidden meaning or multiple meanings underneath it that you can explore via this numeric language. So, again, pay attention to that. And there was another point that it ties into this that just came into my mind and left. So hopefully we'll get back to that. But, that's what it was. So the Greeks, for example, they could not speak freely. So they would heavily encode their texts back then to include hidden meanings. And anytime you're reading an alchemical text or you're reading a holy text or you're reading something that someone has ciphered, things you look for, common things you look for. Number 1, if you see a number in the text itself, that's a key. So if you see something like the devil can prosecute on the earth for 364 days, you take that number 364. If you're hearing a lecture, you're reading that the building was supported by 92 pillars, and they're being very specific. You take that number 92 and you put that somewhere because that means something. Anytime you see proper names being used, you pay attention to those, because those proper names are often in reference to something else, or they're saying, take the geometric value. You have to know which cipher to use, but take the geometric value because it's going to unlock something else. So pay attention to that. Anytime you see dimensions of something given, like it's 12 furlongs or cubits or whatever, pay attention to those, because those are often going to lead you down. They've been encoded in some way, names, etc. A common one that people don't like to acknowledge, but the number 666, which everyone claims is the mark of the devil, it is said is also the geometrical value of Nero, who was persecuting the Christians. And so the Greeks, when they wrote Revelations, they were using that as code. So keep all that in mind. Now, this slide right here is just more for your own reference. These are two commonly used Hebrew ciphers. There are many more. So we can see on the top is the standard version. This is what they would consider standard today, and this is where the 364 came from, in which case all 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet just have one value. Even its final forms will match the value of its parent letter. Whereas Mispar Gadol, which I probably mispronounced, has final values its final characters have final values. So if we can find noon here real quick as an example, this is noon right here. So noon in its normal form is like this little fish hook thing, and noon in its final form, just think of that fish hook as straightened out into this long line. So noon is normally the value 50, but in its final form, it is the value 700. And you can see there are 5 characters in the Hebrew alphabet that have a final letter. Now, the meat of this video is that Gematria by itself we apply to words, but you can also apply it to geometrical shapes and geometry in general, because a geometrical shape has a mathematical value to it. So any shape has 3 ways we can assign a numeric correspondence. The first is by the shape itself. So I use the example of a triangle. A triangle has 3 sides, therefore its value is 3. A square has 4 sides, therefore its value is 4. These are values you can assign to the shape. The second would be by its proportions, such as the pentagram, the hexagram, or a circle. We're going to use a circle as an example in here, because circles and whatnot, and pentagrams and hexagrams, while they have sides, they also are complex shapes that have proportions inside of them, and those proportions can be used to assign a geometrical value. And by the obvious dimensions of its object, that being its circumference or its perimeter, etc. So the first example we have is the Templar cross, the equal armed cross. The equal armed cross, in this case, we're going to give 2 values to. One, we can just say it has 4 sides, therefore it is the number 4. But when we lay it out by its squares, we see there are 5 squares. Therefore, we can also apply the number 5 to the Templar cross. You're right, you're going to find there's no hard rule, which someone will go, well, how can it be 4 or 5? Yep. That's Gematria. And this is where this is where you lose a lot of people. But it is a cipher that is used, and so there are things you have to pay attention to if you want to get into this, like which version did they mean, 4 or 5? The Calvary cross, here's another example. The Calvary cross is a little bit different than the Templar cross because the vertical line is longer. The Calvary cross has 6 squares that make it up. Therefore, we can say its value is 6. Fun note, when you fold the Calvary cross up, it forms a cube. A cube. And a cube is a Platonic solid for the element of earth. Salt cubes. Salt of the earth. The cube, the Calvary cross. These all relate to each other. Now, if we assume that each side of these squares is the lowest we can work with, the number 1, then we also know that its perimeter, therefore, is 14, and we can count that. Its perimeter. Watch. Starting at this line right here. Well, let's get a laser pointer. All right. Starting with this value here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Therefore, because its perimeter is 14, it's an obvious dimension of the object, we can say that a Calvary cross's value is also 14. Then the circle, which doesn't have solid sides, but some things with the circle. We know that if we take the circumference of the circle, and the circumference of a circle is the value of the outer line here, so how big that is, and we divide that by its diameter, and the diameter of a circle is a line going through the middle of it, basically, that we get the value pi, which is an irregular number. It goes on to infinity, 3.1415926 da 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 on in ad infinitum. So what we can do with math is find the closest values we can, the closest ratio to pi that we can, which is 22 and 7. So the ratio 22 to 7 comes out when you divide it to be roughly 3.14, which is as close as we can get to an actual ratio. And so therefore in Kabbalah, the value of a circle will thus be 22 and a diameter of 7, circumference of 22 and a diameter of 7. Keep those numbers in mind. Now we can move forward. 22 and 7 are very powerful numbers. We know that there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, 22 major arcana in the tarot, 22 paths on the tree of life. We know that 2 plus 2 is 4, which comes out to be the sides of a square, which has its own meanings. 7, well, the 7 seals of Solomon, the 7 planets, the 7 archangels associated with those, and so forth. The number 7 is a very important number. So if we look at a cross and the circle in a cross, so I've given you 2 examples of a circle and a cross, one of those being that Templar insignia again. The cross itself is 2 lines. Therefore, if the cross itself is 2 lines, and this can be any cross, so here's a Calvary cross and here's an equal armed cross, doesn't matter, a cross, the symbol of a cross, has 2 lines, a vertical and a horizontal line. Those represent 2 diameters of a circle, and thus, if we know that the diameter of a circle is 7, we can say that any cross can have a value also of 14. Again, because there's 2 lines, they're two diameters. A circle and a cross being no matter the ratio, no matter if the circle's like this or if the circle encompasses the cross like this value right here. So you notice this cross is in the circle, this cross is out the circle. We know that the cross, if we say the cross has a value of 4 because there's 4 sides, then the value of the circle and the cross can be 22 for the circle. Remember, the circumference of a circle is 22, plus 4 is 26. If we want to say that the cross value is 14, like we calculated up here instead, then the value of a circle and a cross would be 36. It would be 22 for the circumference of the circle and 14 for the 2 diameters. So you can approach this thing in 2 ways and get 2 different values because, again, it's not absolute. But if you were going to see a document talking and encoding this gematria, there should be hints as to which one it's using. If it's talking like about 4 sides or a square, as an example, I would be led to believe that the value of the cross here would be 26 because somewhere in the document it talked about a square, so they mean the number 4. If it's talking about 2 circles, as an example, or 2 circular objects, then I would know, oh, we mean number 14. So this is actually coded to be the number 36. Last, we're going to look at some alchemy. And I see that I'm over the words. That's fine. I'll read them out loud. Well, actually, we'll move my head up. Okay. All right, alchemy. One of my favorite subjects now. Alchemy, the 3 primary principles of alchemy is salt, sulfur, and mercury. Okay? Now, salt represents the physical body. It's the feminine principle. And in the middle here is salt. And this is the symbol that we recognize as salt. Sulfur is the masculine principle. It is fiery and has everything to do with our emotions. And mercury is that intermediary between the 2. It has no gender, it's genderless, and it flows, and it's very creative. All right. So in alchemy, these things have a meaning. And I've done some lectures on alchemy. You're free to peruse, and you'll probably see me do more in the future. But I'm not going to get more into alchemy. But we can look at the symbols themselves. Now, these symbols are composed of shapes we have just seen. So starting with Mercury, if we wanted to get geometrical values for Mercury, this shape, we see that Mercury is composed of a circle. We see it's composed of a cross. And we see that it's composed of a half circle. So there are three distinct shapes in here. Now, we already talked about the cross can have two values, 4 or 14. We're just going to go with the number 4 for this example, but keep in mind that could be the number 14 if you're using it. If it's being written about in an alchemical text, there should be a hint or a secret somewhere that tells you which version they're using. Now, we know a circle is 22 because we explained the ratio 22 and 7. We know the cross in this case is going to be 4, and we know a half circle is half of 22 or 11. That comes out to be the number 37. So Mercury comes out to be the number 37. And when we add 37 together, we get the number 10, which is the completion. The completion. And then when we combine 10, it goes to 1, which is the origin. And Mercury in alchemy is the final state we need to stabilize, to complete our great work. So those numbers are very apt. Sulfur, we see over here, sulfur is a triangle and a cross. Well, those are easy. Triangle's 3, the cross is 4. That comes out to be the number 7. 7's a very interesting number. We already talked about 7 is one of the sacred numbers. 7 is also on the tree of life, correspondent to the Sephiroth Netzach, which is ruled by Venus, which rules our desires and our passions and our emotions, which is exactly what sulfur is. And last, we have salt. Salt is a circle and a diameter, which comes out to be 22 plus 7, or 29. Salt is 29. When you combine 29, you get 11, 1 and 1, which comes out to be 2. 2 means duality, the two sides of things, which is what salt also represents, that material duality. Some examples we give here of of other things that have the number 29 based off of standard gematria. Based off of standard gematria, 29 is this kazab, which are these 3 letters, which means spin, bind, deceive, or magic. Well, magic is rooted in our materialism, not materialism, the philosophy, but the material body, the material world. In alchemy, we work to unite sulfur and mercury. So if we combine sulfur and mercury, we get the number 44, who corresponds to the word dem, or blood, which is an important alchemical reference. If we combine all 3 of these things, which is the final act of alchemy, we get the number 44, we get the number 73. 73 is the same as the Hebrew word chokmah, or wisdom. It's one of the Sephiroth on the tree of life. It's wisdom, meaning if I combine these 3, I'm going to receive wisdom, as well as chabin, which means like a stone, which is the philosopher's stone. So if you ever wondered where some of these words come from, it comes from these numbers and their corresponding meanings in other languages, in this case, Hebrew. So the philosopher's stone is one of the final products of alchemy. It is the stone by which you are made perfect. You are given eternal life. You know, all of those things that you've heard about. All right. So this video is more of like a teaser just to kind of get into some other things. What can gematria be used for other than words? And in this case, you can use gematria for geometry. You can give geometrical shapes numeric values which correspond to other terms. And in fact, you may see that sometime in your studies. There are monuments and citadels and cathedrals built that have numbers encoded in them that have meanings. When people say that, this is what they mean. This is what they're referring to. It's not easy to find these things, but if you work on it, you can definitely make some progress and see what some of these messages were that were left behind. So, something to think about. I hope you enjoyed the content today. I hope you enjoyed this video and the topic. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment section below. Otherwise, I look forward to our next rendezvous. And until then, stay safe, keep studying, keep your mind sharp and your heart pure. And we will talk to you again.